Hello and welcome back to my channel. And today I'm discussing what the books. Books that totally bamboozle you, that are really odd or weird, or you don't know what to make of them, or take you into a kind of literature that you've never really discussed or thought about before. One of these books for me is Flann O'Brien's The Third Policeman. Now, Flann O'Brien is best known for his book At Swim Two Birds, which Dylan Thomas brilliantly said is the book to give your sister if she's a loud, dirty, boozy girl. Which I think is one of the best pieces of literary criticism ever. He's an Irish writer. This is a lesser known book by him, and I think it's an absolutely fascinating book. It's a surreal fantasy, I suppose, with a very dark edge, and it's very, very funny. It's about this guy in an Irish village, and he's brought into a sort of criminal enterprise where he kills someone. But then when he tries to leave the house where he's killed this person, he finds himself in this weird kind of dream world. And he falls foul of these two policemen who are a bit like Laurel and Hardy, who are in this kind of police station that seems two-dimensional. It's all very peculiar, and there's a wonderful, like, two-page scene where they're trying to ask him his name. They say, is it Sean? No. Is it Brendan? No. Is it Thomas? No. Must be Colin? No. And it just goes on and on and on. So it's got a very surreal, almost Spike Milligan style of humour. But all the time there's this kind of sense of dread, of strangeness, of being trapped in a nightmare. You kind of know where it's going before the end, but how it gets there is extraordinary. It's a really strange book. It's as if Kafka and Spike Milligan had got together to make a book. I've always wondered how someone could turn it into a movie. I think it's an extraordinary novel, and it made me laugh very much, and I think it's a brilliant sort of satire on Irish rural life in a way, but it leads to a very, very chilling climax. A very different kind of what the book is Michael Moorcock's The Dancers at the End of Time. This is another book that's largely very funny and very comic, but has a sort of almost sad, melancholy strain through it. It's set in the far future where humanity has evolved to the point where it doesn't do any work, it's completely decadent, it has parties, at these parties they can swap their dress and their skin and their identities at will. And it's a kind of Oscar Wildean world where the sort of decadence of Oscar Wilde has reached its extreme apogee, right? And then one of them has to go back in time, and he goes back to Victorian England, the exact opposite of that, very stuffy, very controlled, And he meets a woman and falls in love with her, and then takes her on his travels, takes her back to the future, and you watch as this Victorian woman deals with this world of hedonism and promiscuity, and becomes part of it. It's very funny, it's very cleverly written, it's bonkers. I mean, it's such an indulgent book, it's such a fantastical book, but you kind of get caught up in it. If you sat back and thought about it after you'd read it, you think, how on earth does this book hold together? But somehow it does. It's like, I don't know, it's kind of Oscar Wilde crossed with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's the best way I could describe it. One of the big what the books which I read when I was at university and which I fell in love with is this book, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Now, on the surface, this appears to be quite a straightforward book. It's about a series of conversations between Kubla Khan and Marco Polo. And Polo is describing the cities that he's visited on his way to getting to Kubla Khan's great palace. But as the description of the cities goes on, each chapter is made up of a description of a different city. The cities become more abstract, more poetically and lyrically described. They become more about philosophical ideas rather than concrete systems and cultures. And Calvino was the great postmodernist writer, wasn't he? Really, the great Italian postmodernist writer. He and Umberto Eco. So the book it's a literary play, and it plays with themes of political, cultural, and social ideas morphing into philosophical and literary ideas. It's not a book for everyone. I absolutely fell in love with it. It's been one of my favourite novels ever since, and I've gone back to it periodically. It reminds me of another novel that I came across quite by chance. I just saw this in Waterstones, the bookshop. I bought it, I'd never heard of it. Letters Back to Ancient China by Herbert Rosendorfer, a German novelist. This is terrific fun. Basically, this 10th century Mandarin Chinese scholar finds himself transported into the future, into modern day Germany. And it's just about his adventures in modern day Germany and how he finds, of course, many differences, but also many things that are the same. And it's about his love affair with a modern German woman. It's very funny, it's brilliantly written, it's very light but intelligent and gently subversive, I think. And I strongly recommend it. If you've never come across it, this is a highly recommended novel. It's great fun. It's a very light novel, but it's deceptively intelligent, deceptively clever. One of my favourite writers when I was younger was J.G. Ballard. Even I struggled with the Atrocity Exhibition, which is probably Ballard's most well-known, out-there novel. The whole thing is structured in bullet points, like exhibitions, sort of exhibits in a museum with the descriptive prose underneath it. That's how the whole book is written, with occasional sidelines into, sort of almost like document writing. The whole book is not a single part of it is written in straightforward prose. I still don't really know if I ever got a handle on this book, to be honest. It's the summit, it's the apogee of Ballard's fascination with this idea of reconstructing man in the wake of what's happened in the 20th century, in the wake of cinema and the celebrity cult, this new human being emerging at the end of the 20th century, the human being created by media and television and film and technology. It's worth a try if you want something that's really out there. But if you want to try something that I think the most out there book by Ballard I've ever read, actually, is The Unlimited Dream Company, which he wrote in the late 70s. It's about this young guy, he's a pilot, and he crashes in the Thames near Shepperton. And from the moment he emerges from the plane, Shepperton starts to change, and it becomes this lush, multicoloured jungle scenario with plentiful flora and fauna, and people start dissolving into orgiastic excess, and he becomes this kind of creator god wandering naked around Shepperton. For those of people who are easily shocked, you should switch off now. But he just ends up in one sequence, just end up going round Shepperton, masturbating wherever his seed hits the ground. It flowers up in orchids and palm trees and jungle flora and fauna. It's an extraordinary novel. I didn't really quite know what the hell was going on, but I thoroughly enjoyed its oddness. A book which I've loved for the longest time, but actually isn't very well known, is this book, The Manuscript, found in Saragossa by Jan Potocki, who was a Polish aristocrat. This is an extraordinary book. It blew my head off when I read it. The closest comparison is Don Quixote by Cervantes. It's also set in Spain. It's set in the deserts of Spain, in places like Almeria and so on, in the Campos de Nija. And it's about a guy trying to wend his way through. And the best way I can describe it, it's like a sort of surreal, macabre western, where this guy comes across bandits and thieves and witches and occult practices, just in this attempt to get across this territory. And the reason it's similar to Cervantes is because it's got lots of embedded narratives. So someone will start telling a story, then that links into another story, then another story, then it links back to the previous story. It's full of digressions. There's nothing else I've ever read quite like it. It was turned into a film in the 60s, which I'm not that keen on, though it is a cult film. But the reading of the film, it's so much fun, It's got supernatural, it's witty, it's clever, it plays literary games with embedded stories. It's got something for everyone, and it's a total one-off. There's nothing quite like it. It's more serious, more surreal than Quixote. But also I find it more darkly fun, actually. Now finally today, I'd just like to recommend 2 Spanish books that might be difficult to find in translation. If you can, they're well worth your time. This was a book I loved when I discovered it when I was studying Spanish at university. Eduardo Mendoza's El Misterio de la Cripta Embrujada, which means the mystery of the haunted crypt. Now, this book, I love this book so much. It's a detective novel, right? But there's a difference, and that is that the detective just might be completely insane. He seems to have escaped from an asylum, and really the whole story might be in his head. And that's the premise of the book. It's terrific fun. It's a very good read. It's a great piece of literature, but it reads like a sort of normal, easygoing detective novel, written in really good, clean prose. I'm not aware if there is an English version available. If there is, hunt it down. It's absolutely terrific fun. On a different level altogether, and this is a book that's not for those who are easily offended, is Juan Goytisolo's Makbara, which you can find in English translation. Goytisolo was a fascinating writer, and he ended up living in Paris for most of his life, where he was married to this woman, but he was bisexual, and he used to travel all the time between Paris and Marrakesh, where he had an Arab lover, or perhaps several Arab lovers. And this feeds into the story of this book, where it's about the relationship between a Western, white woman, tourist, and an Arab man who, shall we say, is hung quite spectacularly. He has a penis that's about 9 foot long. I told you it's not for the easily offended. And it's a book that is a massive riposte to taste and political correctness, though there wasn't any such thing as political correctness when he wrote it, but to all the assumptions and moral assumptions of both the West and the East. It's a book that's sticking two fingers up to everyone, which is one of the reasons I admire it so much. It's very good fun. It's very funny. It's very dangerous. It doesn't take any prisoners. It's the kind of book that I miss and wish there was more of. Nothing else quite like it. So those are my favourite what the books. What are the books that have really sort of, bamboozled you, which you didn't expect and which have really surprised you? I'd love to know below. Thanks very much for watching, and if you like my content, please like and subscribe.